This episode discusses historical epidemics, mass death, and the disturbance of human remains. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, I'm Lady Saelym.
And I'm Madam Omen.
Join us as we dive deeper into Galveston's history. Pirates and storms, true crime and tragedy.
And the lore and legends that were born from it.
We're not here to tell ghost stories. We're here to uncover where they started.
And what never fully let go. And who stayed behind.
Beyond the past, because history doesn't rest, and neither should you. Good evening, Madam Omen. How are you?
Oh, I'm hanging in there, Lady Saelym. It has been so busy after the holidays.
What do you think about the launch?
I was nervous. I was really nervous. This is exciting. This is my first time being a part of a project like this. So I definitely stepped out of my comfort zone, but I'm really excited. I'm learning so much.
Oh, yeah. It's addictive, isn't it? I made the huge faux pas. We drove 5 hours to drop the kids off. And so I stayed up and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to make sure everything's perfect. The sound's perfect. I did new video for it, had it all ready to go. We were traveling. And when I got home, I was like, that's not the same video I just did. And then I listened to it. I wanted to die because it wasn't the right one and the audio wasn't fixed. But by that time, we already had a bunch of subscribers and a bunch of views, so I just left it, and it is what it is.
Sometimes life just needs it to be good enough so that we can keep going forward.
You're so right. In a more serious format, shall we begin?
Okay, let's do this.
You know, this episode took longer to write than I expected. And it wasn't because any record was difficult to find. It was because once I started reading the burial entries in Galveston, I quickly realized that I wasn't looking at just one cemetery or even just one moment in time. I was looking at a city that kept burying its dead while the ground underneath it was changing. Ever so often, a name was followed by a note, not just a story, but enough to tell me that a body didn't stay where it was first placed. And that's when I realized this story doesn't begin in a cemetery. It begins with waiting.
Those notes don't sound alarmed. They don't sound surprised either. It just sounds routine. That's the part that I can't make sense of, is not necessarily why it happened, but how it became something that no one questioned.
Yeah, it also changes how you think about the word cemetery, because most people imagine something fixed, permanent, or fenced, but Galveston has never really been any of those things.
No, even the places that are meant to be final don't feel settled here.
For listeners who aren't familiar, Galveston is a barrier island. The shoreline shifts, elevation changes, and the city has rebuilt itself over and over. From the earliest days of settlement, Galveston learned how to adapt to storms, tides, disease, and growth. And death adapted too. So tonight's episode isn't about ghosts, but it helps explain why there's maybe so much lore about ghosts on the island. Because before you get hauntings, you usually get disruption.
Right. And I mean, Galveston didn't just disrupt the living. It kept disrupting the dead too.
So here's how tonight's going to work. We're not going to chase folklore. We're not going to fill the silence with guesses. We're just going to start with what's written down and what was recorded and what someone felt important enough to note at the time.
Sometimes what is written is more unsettling than anything you could make up.
You're absolutely right. So tonight we're talking about what happens when the dead are asked to move. Welcome to Beyond the Past. This is Moved, Forgotten, and Left Behind, Galveston Cemeteries and Disrupted Burials. By the mid-1800s, Galveston was already a city in motion, a major port expanding fast, ships arriving daily, sometimes hourly. Goods moved through, people moved through, labor, money, opportunity. And ships brought more than just trade. They brought illness, cholera, yellow fever, smallpox. And these illnesses did not arrive quietly. And when they reached a dense port city, death didn't just become tragic. It became something the city had to manage.
I mean, we're talking epidemics here. That's the shift that stops me. When death stops being singular and when it starts being counted. Because even as early as 1839, when Galveston had its first major fever year, the city was already losing control of its dead. The ground hadn't been secured, cemeteries weren't fenced yet, and the coffins were being pulled back up by the rain and the tide.
Galveston didn't just have one place for the dead. It couldn't afford to. Instead, the city created many different grounds for different needs. Some were meant to last, others were meant to hold until something could be decided. So there were potters field for those without money, without family, and sometimes without names. There were temporary burial grounds used when outbreaks moved faster than ceremony. And there were organized cemeteries meant to be permanent, at least on paper. So now, none of these places were secret. They were official, approved, and recorded.
I mean, emergency solutions will rarely come with long-term thinking. It's a triage.
Yeah. And there's a phrase that I saw again and again. I kept seeing temporary burial.
Saw that too.
I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever heard that today, in this day and age, but it is official record, and it wasn't emotional, it was procedure. Temporary burial simply was defined as burial now and names later. Burial now because the bodies couldn't wait. Because the heat couldn't wait, disease couldn't wait, and the city couldn't afford to either. It wasn't necessarily about permanence at that time, but it was 100% about containment.
Yeah, I mean, emphasis on containment because you have diseases that you're trying to prevent the spread of, not even knowing how they are spreading.
Exactly.
And once something like this is done out of necessity for long enough, it can stop sounding like an emergency. It's just policy at that point.
And that just sounds so official, right? But you're right, exactly. And during epidemics or mass death events, temporary burials allowed the city to keep functioning. Families were often expected to return later once the danger had passed and once the conditions had stabilized. But that system also depended on one quiet assumption, and that was that time would cooperate. One thing we've learned through our research is Galveston has never been a place where time cooperates for long.
I mean, time doesn't just pass here, it interrupts. And when it does, people don't or can't always come back for what they were intending to reclaim.
And there were years when the system was just simply overwhelmed. 1867 was one of them. Nearly 700 to 800 people died in a city of roughly 22,000 residents. That isn't a brief surge, that is a rupture. Now, yellow fever arrived in a way it often did in the port cities, by ship. But at that time, no one understood how the disease was transmitted. That didn't come around until the 1900s. They didn't know how it spread, they didn't know how to cure it, and without understanding the causes of the disease, well, they just didn't know how to stop it effectively. By the time yellow fever struck Galveston in 1867, the Civil War had just ended 2 years previously. The city was still recovering economically, socially, and medically. Resources were limited, medical care was strained, and deaths began to occur faster than families could manage the ritual of grief. So what did the city do? It adjusted out of necessity. As the epidemic intensified, burial practices shifted. Cemeteries expanded, and temporary burial measures were used to keep pace with the dead. Funerals were shortened or omitted altogether. Markers were minimal, if they were placed at all. Organizations such as the Howard Association worked continuously, providing aid, organizing care, and assisting with burials when families could not. Burial crews moved through the city, collecting the dead and transporting them to available burial grounds as effectively as possible. These graves were not intended to be permanent. They were meant to hold until conditions improved, until families could return, and until the city could once again breathe. But for many, that later never came. The years passed. The city expanded, streets were laid, and homes were built. And in places once shaped by urgency, some people still remain. September 8th of 1900 was the date that the Great Storm of 1900 hit. It was a Category 4 hurricane that came in with a 15 to 17-foot wave and took out most of the island. With that, it took with it 6,000 to 8,000 lives, and in some cases, it's even been said that it could have been up to 15,000. They don't know. Yeah, so this happened in a night, and bodies were recovered for weeks and sometimes even months. Now, the newspaper records the aftermath carefully, the recovery efforts, the emergency conditions, burial instructions. But what matters here isn't the spectacle of the storm. It's what came after. Emergency burials happened everywhere across the island. People were buried where they were found. Some were in coffins, some were not. Some had names, some didn't. Some have markers, some did not. And it wasn't because people didn't care, but because disease was going to spread, and it depended on everybody's survival for this to happen as quickly as possible.
Wow. So the entire city had to make this decision all at once. The living came first. The displaced didn't stop with the living. And the Great Storm of 1900 moved everything.
Everything.
I looked this up, when you presented this to me, I was like, this sounds interesting. And oh my gosh, I looked up pictures. Don't do that. Or do.
Galveston chose to rebuild, not just its buildings, but the land itself. Sand was dredged from the bay, buildings were lifted, and streets were raised, and in some places by as much as 17 feet. After the storm, bodies were burned on funeral pyres to prevent disease, but the fires couldn't destroy the bones because it didn't burn hot enough. So when the grade was raised, those remains were buried within the new elevation.
So what you're saying, hold on. So you're saying that it's possible walking through Galveston, you could be standing over someone's grave and not even know it.
So just hold your breath the whole time, you'll be okay.
Oh my gosh. That's funny you mentioned that. When I was a kid, anytime we drove past a cemetery, one of my childhood friends and I, we would lift our feet up off of the floorboard and hold our breath until we were done driving past the cemetery from start to finish. So I don't think we could do that in Galveston. And now I'm questioning everything.
It's literally history underfoot. Now, buildings could be lifted, streets could be raised, but the cemeteries, they don't move the way structures do. So official burials relied on records of what was already under strain. And when the land changed, certainty didn't always rise with it.
I mean, even within the Broadway cemeteries, which is well known in Galveston, the ground didn't change just once. It was raised again and again and created layers. Markers were covered and some were lost entirely. What may look like a single quiet lawn today actually holds generations stacked in silence. Not every grave was lifted. Some families were gone, and some couldn't afford it. So the sand was piled around them instead, leaving those graves sunken below the new grade, quietly lower than the world that was still living above them.
I'm so glad you brought up the Broadway Cemetery, because Galveston didn't just develop one single cemetery, it developed a burial landscape, especially along what is now the Broadway Cemetery Historic District. So there's 7 district sections laid out over nearly a century. Each section served a different community, a different moment in the city's life. Catholics, Jews, Episcopalians, the poor, the unclaimed, the lost to the fever of the storm. So when people refer to the cemetery, they technically are flattening something that was never meant to be singular. Magnolia Grove Cemetery was established in 1871, and for decades it served its purpose quietly, officially and with record. But by the 1940s, Galveston was growing again. The industry was expanding. The city was modernizing. The land was slated for development tied to what would become Galveston's municipal airport. What followed wasn't hidden. It was a documented city decision. The relocation process began with measurement. The cemetery was surveyed. Plots were identified using whatever remained: markers, burial registers, plot cards, and city records. Then came the notice, public announcements, deadlines. Families were required to come forward in order to prove their claims. Identified and claimed graves were relocated, but unmarked graves, or those without surviving documentation, could not always be officially acknowledged or moved. Not because the person didn't matter, but because the system required proof, and proof didn't survive equally for everyone.
On paper, that sounds orderly, right? I mean, survey, notice, deadline, and proof. Great in theory. I mean, what I keep thinking about are the people who never saw the notices, families who had already left the island, names that existed only on stones that were weathered smooth, and records that didn't survive fires, storms, or time. Because once proof became the requirement, memory stopped being enough. And that meant that some graves were never claimed, not because no one cared, but because no one could prove who they were.
Yeah, you're right. And it was deliberate, but it just seems so impersonal,
Staged.
I guess. Yeah. And the process was staged. It had confirmed graves were addressed first, remains were removed, transferred, and reburied according to the record. Unmarked graves, however, were different. If a burial couldn't be proven on paper, there was no authority to move it, which meant, back to what we spoke about before, some graves stayed, not because they were chose to remain, but because there was no longer a way to officially move them. So under the airport, there are still bodies.
Okay. That's a big pill to swallow. So that's where the system shows its edge then, because once proof became the gatekeeper, absence also became the verdict. No marker, no paperwork, no authority to act. Some graves just weren't relocated by default, and they remain in place, not officially acknowledged, but certainly not gone either.
The city didn't decide who mattered. The paperwork decided what could be acted upon. And I guess, and this is what a disrupted burial looks like on record. Now, I think I mentioned this in the first podcast that one of the first things I did when I got to Galveston was get myself a job as a ghost tour host because I really wanted to learn about why there was so much lore in Galveston. So just hearing in this small segment what's taken place kind of helps you understand where the lore comes from. Because when records are uncertain or things like this happen, your mind has to fill in the gaps somehow. So start stories over time. This is why it happened. This is how it happened. And it's not necessarily that lore is a lie or a fantasy. It's just an attempt to make sense of what can't be made sense of in our time.
What can no longer be proven. Yeah, I mean, once that uncertainty settles in, it doesn't stay contained. It drifts, it attaches itself to places, to names, to moments that just feel unfinished. And it's not that people believe everything they hear, but because leaving a question unanswered is sometimes more unsettling than any story could actually be.
When the paper ends, what takes over?
Imagination.
Now, just to sum this all up, what we just discussed, because it was a lot. Here's what the record does support cleanly. Galveston endured repeated mass death events that required emergency burials. To survive what came next, the city altered the ground itself. Cemetery relocations followed. Marked graves supported by proof were moved. Unmarked remains were not. Those are the facts. They are documented. And they're sufficient, that?
I mean, sufficient for history, but not always for the people left behind by it. Records don't answer what it feels like to lose a place meant to be permanent. They don't explain what happens when a grave has no marker, no paper trail, and no one left to claim them. So the ledger closes and the map ends. Whatever questions remain don't disappear, they just stop being documented.
Exactly. The record tells us what happened and how, but what it leaves behind lives between those lines. Okay. Now, cemeteries aren't just scenery. They aren't just backdrops or quiet places to pass through. They are records of lives that were ultimately carved in stone. And each one marks a life that once breathed the same salt air we do now. And when those records fade, washed by the tide, buried by sand, lost to a missing page in a ledger, they don't just simply disappear. They leave a hollow, a space where someone once was.
I want to comment here that hollow does deserve some restraint. Not silence out of fear, but out of respect. What remains isn't a story that we can finish.
So tonight, we didn't trace footsteps. We traced absences. Places where names were meant to last and didn't.
Because what haunts a place isn't always what's seen. Sometimes it was what was never properly laid to rest.
Until then, we raise a light to the souls left behind.
We'll keep the lantern lit.
Next time, we follow a story born from waiting, offshore, unseen, and unheard.
Beyond the past, because history doesn't rest, and neither should you.